big moment. See if we can communicate with the computer.
Pop the hood just to have it ready to lift the leaks. You didn't put gas in it yet.
That's right, need to put gas in it. We got 5 gallons of premium. We're just going with on ignition. Heard the fuel pump prime. See if Mark can connect to it so we can monitor the computer, all the vitals. Got an external oil pressure gauge hooked up, hanging over the fender there, and the crankshaft position sensor is disconnected, so I can turn it over initially without it firing and see if we have oil pressure while we're cranking. I primed it last night with 10 quarts running through it, so it should be primed. So we'll see if we get pressure. Okay, we are ready to give it its first cranks without ignition. See if we get any pressure reading on the gauge. Oof.
So it's not going to fire because
It's not going to fire.
No crank sensor.
Oil pressure. No leaks. Hate this. So dumb. Like, do you trust Harbor Freight crap? No?
It's a toughie. I've never cranked it with it. When he first did, the first time it looked like it.
Did it?
A little tick. And is it an empty line? Somewhat.
It is. It's an empty line.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Fire it and see if it responds. What about the gauge? Does the gauge show anything?
Well, the gauge won't show anything because I don't have a sensor. Yeah. So but that's kind of where we're at. Taking this stupid thing off and putting the sensor on. I don't want to turn it over anymore. Stinking oil pops, man, I swear. Yeah, we gotta pull that thing off and get a sensor in there. See if we get anything on the gauge. I don't have anything else.
You have any way to test the gauge? Plug it into your oil prime tank. Just pressurize it on that. Make sure the gauge works. You've used the gauge before?
Yeah.
Worked in the past?
Yeah.
I don't fire, but is that good?
Yep. It was nothing.
It's starting to rumble.
It's just getting fuel to it.
Okay.
Still on off the key a few times. Prime it.
There goes again.
Was there nothing?
There was nothing.
What's up?
Well, I can't just let it run because it doesn't have oil pressure. I can't run it without oil.
You don't know why it doesn't have oil pressure?
Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know if it's the gauge. It totally could be the gauge. But we couldn't get it to register by cranking it over without it starting because we had the sensor, one of the sensors disconnected, so it wouldn't start. We thought maybe it needed a little more RPM, which you get once it starts. It spins at a higher RPM, and then we were hoping the oil pump would prime. It still didn't register, so what we need to do is assume this gauge is jacked. We need to roll it in there, put it on the lift, take that gauge off, put the real sensor in, plug it in. The thing about the sensor is that it runs the gauge on the dash, and the gauge on the dash doesn't tell you how many PSI, how much pressure you have. It just tells you there is some pressure. I was like wanting to use this to read the actual pressure, and it didn't read a darn thing.
You know,
so
there has to be some.
it could be nothing.
So before you plug it in and crank it again, I would test that gauge just on your tank. You pressurize the tank and it should...
Just some pressure on that should read, right?
Yeah, you can plug it into the line that you're filling, you know, the other end somehow, and
That's
just
a good idea.
load it up.
Okay.
Just to double check that, if it's full of crap.
Yeah, might be a Harbor Freight piece of garbage. All right, here we are into the car after that big fiasco. Holy cow. Couldn't get oil pressure read on the gauge. Still not sure if that is a good gauge or not. We're going to check that before we crank it again. But I got a oil pressure sensor in there hooked to the computer, and it became a big job in itself. As you can see, hold on. That's right. That's right. That piece right there wouldn't let it go in at all. So we took care of that with a little garage work machining. Hacksaw. Took care of that junk. So we're gonna test the other gauge, make sure, see what it says, and then we'll try again.
That might be more water from washing. Dripping down.
Yeah, just from water. Well, it could be from oil. Spilled a lot of oil. Okay. Spilled a lot of oil taking things apart. It's not pressurized. All right, we're gonna try this again. We finally got oil pressure. Had to modify some things. Show you that later. Anyway, we got about 85 psi. We'll give it a shot now.
A fire extinguisher or a blanket?
Yeah, do you?
There's a fire extinguisher in there at the welder, actually.
Hopefully it doesn't burn down. And
I already paid for it. So.
well, I mean, again, if it burned down.
Okay, here goes. Maybe I topped it off, but
I would check that.
let it idle for a sec.
I would check your power steering though. Mine's sucking in really, really fast. I couldn't figure out, like, seems like it's kind of more.
Just want to hear it a little, if it'll stay. Okay, let's change the oil.
Drive it on or no?
Sure. I could drop the hood. That was good. That was good. Thank you, Mark. Dad. Obviously, this is post initial start of the car. Had some drama a little bit. It always happens with these oil pumps. I've had it happen on Expeditions or the 5.4 mod engine, and it turns out to be no different with the 4.6 modular engine, or in this case the 5.1. The gear rotor oil pumps are provider of some high stress moments. So primed the car last night with 10 quarts of oil running through the engine with a pressurized system, 40 to 50 psi, 10 quarts running through it. Got oil all the way to the top end of the engine through the oil pressure sensor port. Thinking, you know, cranking it over by hand while it's going and thinking it's going to be good to go. Get it out there. Today, with the crankshaft position sensor disconnected so we don't get any ignition, still turning it over with the key just to make sure we have pressure on our manual gauge that we had hooked up so we could read the actual pressure. Thinking we should have pressure pretty quick. No, sir. So try it a couple times, cranking it a few seconds each time, no pressure, no pressure. Finally say, you know what? Let's start it. Start it up, no pressure. Man, fight with it in here, gets me second guessing my gauge. You know, I did buy it at Harbor Freight, but I have used it before and got good pressure readings. So anyway, get you second guessing your test equipment, and then tested the gauge on my external oil pressure tank. I hooked up the gauge to that and I got good pressure, so I was hoping I wouldn't, and then I could at least rest easy knowing that I probably did have oil pressure in the engine. So anyway, got it all hooked back up again to the car and did the crank again without the sensor hooked up. Still nothing, still nothing. Tried one more time. Crank, 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 crank. Pressure starts building, like hallelujah. So it was a happy moment. I'm gonna go ahead and get the oil changed now that we've done the initial run up to temperature. I'm gonna get the oil changed so there's fresh oil in there for the morning, and we'll do some driving.